Welcome to working on an unfinished Victoria steamboat part 3. The propeller shaft is rusty and seized up. In this video I show the solution to the problem. I also start removing the marks from the ABS plastic hull. The propeller shaft was rusted solid into the prop shaft tube, and when I tried to pull it out, the bush came out of the end as well. But don't worry, it's not the end of the world, it's a really easy fix. This is a plastic propeller, not ideal. I think if I'd have been building this boat I would have used a brass one. It's a little bit distorted, but I'm sure it will work. Surprisingly, the plastic propeller is extremely sharp and I'm having to be very careful not to cut my fingers on it. The propeller is held in place just using a lock nut up against the nut that's built into the propeller. This lock nut wasn't tightened against the propeller, so it was a really easy job just to spin it off the shaft. The good thing is, most of the prop shaft that was inside the tube is not rusty. In this part of the clip, I'm removing the lock nut and putting it in a safe place, and now I can pull the prop shaft out of the propeller tube. There's just enough space to slightly bend the prop shaft and pull it through past the rudder. Being very careful not to mark the varnished wood on the rudder with the brass bush stuck on the end of the shaft. If I'm honest, I don't like the design of this hull. It's quite unlike other hulls that I've actually used. Most of it is made from ABS plastic, but then there's a big chunk missing and you replace that with a piece of plywood. I don't know why the moulding didn't go all the way to where it needed to go. The gaps around the piece of plywood definitely need filling. And then with a bit of luck, after rubbing down the entire assembly and painting it, the shape of the hull will look like it's in one piece. I really don't get this construction, but never mind, on with the job. Here's the propeller and the lock nut on the bench. And here, in my hand, is the propeller shaft. It's not rusty in the middle, it's slightly rusty at the inside edge, but at the rear part it's very rusty. Over now to my small Warco M180 lathe, and I've fitted the part in the chuck, and I'm using wet to dry sandpaper to remove all of the rust in this area. It's making a funny noise because the length of the prop shaft is rattling about inside the spindle. After a relatively short time, the propeller shaft is now free of rust and looks okay. Time to turn it around and do the other end, which isn't as rusty as I mentioned earlier, but it still needs cleaning up. Same principle, spin it in the lathe and use wet to dry sandpaper to remove the rust. Health and safety warning, always keep your fingers clear of the chuck when it's spinning. This is a small brass bush that came out of the propeller tube when I withdrew the rusty shaft. I'm going to replace this in the tube using some Loctite 603 to hold it in place. This clip looks worse than it is. I'm very gently using a hammer to tap the bush into position. And when the Loctite 603 has cured, the bush is going nowhere. Before refitting the prop shaft, I applied some silicone grease. What you must not do is pump grease into the tube and then push the shaft in place. If you do fill the tube with grease, two things will happen. As you push the prop shaft back into the tube, a lot of the grease will come out of the hole at the other end, and there will be a lot of drag between the prop shaft and the grease inside the tube. How do I know this? Well, I've built a few steamboats and I once filled the prop shaft with grease and it really didn't run well until I got rid of it. I thought it was a problem with the steam engine, but no, it was just a drag of the grease on the prop shaft inside the tube. Time to test it by running the steam engine on compressed air. Even though the prop shaft doesn't appear to be bent, the propeller appears to be spinning a bit off centre. I would change this for a brass propeller. There is an immediate problem. Did you see it? I'll run the clip again, this time in slow motion. It's really important not to have a big gap between the metal fitting that engages the engine's universal joint and the propeller tube. When running in the water, the boat would work and the propeller would be fine because the pressure of the water would keep it in place. Until, of course, you put the engine into reverse, then what you've just seen would happen, which wouldn't be good in the middle of the lake. It's top tip time. I'm going to show a quick and easy fix using a piece of tubing. I've simply fitted a piece of brass tubing between the prop tube and the fitting that rotates the prop shaft. This is a piece of 1/4 inch outside diameter brass tubing, and the inside diameter is slightly larger than the prop shaft. There is a reason for this, and it's simple. Before running a model steamboat, you would normally oil both ends of the prop shaft. But now, when you oil this end of the prop shaft, some oil will run into the inside diameter of the tube by capillary action. The tube is purposely not a tight fit on the propeller shaft. Retrospectively, I do think that I need to fit a small washer between the propeller lock nut and the bush at the end of the shaft to act as a thrust washer. Generally, this end of the propeller shaft is lubricated by the water in contact with it. Before I start this next job, I would just like to mention that this is a plastic hull, not glass fibre. It is ABS plastic, and it has a lot of marks on it like this, which I think is old tape residue. Do not use acetone as a solvent under any circumstances, because acetone dissolves ABS plastic, and that is not what you want. I'm using Brasso wadding. Brasso wadding contains some very fine cutting compound as well as some solvent, but the solvent does no damage whatsoever to the ABS plastic. These marks have been on this hull for a long time, and some of this sticky tape adhesive was quite difficult to remove. But anyway, that's one side done, one side to go. I will show the removal of the marks on the other side in a future video. On this job, I'm supposed to be checking out the steam plant and making it run, but I had to fix the prop shaft. The base is very dirty and tarnished. I'm going to clean that as well, because I do have to remove the boiler, as well as the gas burner for testing. When I slow down the engine to a reasonable speed, it doesn't make quite as much noise. You can see the slight movement of the propeller shaft fitting when I reverse direction quickly. This is not a problem because when the boat is sailing in the water, most of the time it will be going in a forward direction and only occasionally put into reverse. Sometimes it's a good idea to leave a slight clearance between parts, mainly for two reasons, the first one being obviously lubrication, and maybe not in this case, but contraction and expansion of steam engines can be a problem. And that's about all I can say in this episode, except for stay safe, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.